All right, so this month's book to finish up the year is called Islands of Abandonment: Nature, Rebounding, and Post-Human Landscape. There's the cover for people. It's by Cal Flyn. She is, I believe, Scottish. And she traveled the world and went to, I don't know, like 9 or 10 different sites, and kind of just wrote down her experiences of these sites, and they were all kind of abandoned by humans for, you know, a multitude of ways, and she just documented how kind of nature has reclaimed it, repurposed it, taken over, you know, entropy, whatever type of word or verbiage you want. So I guess we could start at the beginning and go through each one, or if someone had a specific chapter that they want to talk about, or just general thoughts, we can start there too.
Well, I think she summed up her whole book on page 120. And you want me to read that?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Faith in the end is what environmentalism is, boiled down to. Faith is the possibility of change, the prospect of a better future. For green shoots from the rubble, fresh water in the desert, and our faith is often tested. The doomsday, these of several authors, are their ilk are not born of ambition or spite, but drawn from observation, careful study, from the facts, in other words, as well as we can make them out. But I cannot accept their conclusions. To do so is to abandon hope, to accept the inevitability of a fallen world, a ruinous future. And yet everywhere I have looked, everywhere I have been, places bent and broken, despoiled and desolate, polluted and poisoned, I have found new life springing from the wreckage of the old, life all the stranger and more valuable for its resilience. This is a corrupted world, yes, one long fallen from a state of grace, but it is a world too that knows how to live. It has a great capacity for repair, for recovery, for forgiveness of a sort, if we can only learn to let it do so. Lands cleared for cultivation centuries before revert to forest in a matter of years. Environments stripped of their inhabitants can repopulate of their own accord. Even contaminated sites of the very worst kind can, when given the chance, become ecosystems of singular importance. And to me, that sums the whole book up. And I like that because, like, when we went to Cairo, Egypt, the end of the Nile, I thought it was a trash dump, but it was actually the end of it was a canal, and it was littered with trash, but yet people lived and survived there. They told us not to eat the vegetables that were growing along the Nile because our bodies couldn't handle it, but their bodies had adjusted and they could. And also, I remember different places we've been, they have told us, now don't eat the vegetables, because your body just can't stand those bacteria that's in there. But the people, of course, who live there are very accustomed to it and do fine. So I think she points that out in many, many ways when she talks about all these places that have been abandoned for various reasons, and yet life comes back. So in a way, that kind of gives me hope for the future, because even if man is eliminated, he may actually adjust. And some will die, but some will adjust. So that's what I got from the book.
Yeah, I bookmarked that section as well, and actually I bookmarked the next, like, the next several pages. Let me find another section, so kind of going back to, page 226. Also, I had a note, it kind of goes along this. This is, weirdly enough, it's called Alien Invasion, and this takes place in, Amani, Tanzania. And I honestly, that's what I was looking at before the meeting, is what exactly, what exactly was happening, or what caused, people to leave, and I don't remember, weirdly enough. But I did bookmark this page. And it says, in so many places, we are so busy playing at being stewards of the earth, deciding who gets to live and who gets to die. Once we have left our mark on an ecosystem, we show no hesitation in throwing open the hood again, later to fiddle with its workings. We run the earth as if it were one giant botanical garden to tend, passing judgment on species, playing God. And it's that similar thing of like, we lose hope because we think we have to fix it. And I think, in addition to what Marcia was saying, the hope comes from letting go and letting Earth can take care of itself. And we have to adapt to it rather than forcing the world to adapt to us. Yeah.
But she also said that, we do need to take care of the earth. We shouldn't purposely, do terrible things to it. But I always speak of unexpected consequences, and we think we're doing a great thing, and then we see the unexpected consequences, which are usually not good.
Well, and it seems like often it's times, those unintended consequences also happen when we're trying to fix something. Maybe we see something is wrong, and we come up with some novel, grand idea to fix it, but it turns out that maybe the fix is as bad as the original problem and causes unintended consequences in and of itself.
Yeah.
And I was fascinated by her biblical comments. She was always referring back to a biblical time, and especially when it talks about the desert section, she's talking about Moses and the burning bush and what Elijah, and she mentioned 3 or 4 though that had been in the desert and gained hope while they were in the desert.
Yeah. Yeah, she definitely has a spiritual, perhaps Christian background as well. There's another section on that. I think I want to end with that. Let's kind of just dive into like each of these little sections, and if there's something about it you want to talk about or not, we can skip, but I'd like to just kind of review this. For those listening, one of them perks their ears, they can get the book and read about it. The first place she goes to is West Lothian, Scotland, and it's the Five Sisters, which were like these 5 basically slag heaps, just mounds of slag and ruins of mining, and I think it's mining and other things. So they just left there, and then they tried to beautify it in some ways, and it like made it worse. They tried to plant their own grass on it, and it died, and then they just kind of forgot about it, and then it ended up wildflowers and sheep and other animals just started grazing on it. And I think it talked about they commissioned an artist to do something with one of them, and he decided to do nothing.
Hmm.
Like it's just conceptual art thing, and it's like, well, let's see what nature does with it, and yeah, it turns out this, it's kind of this. It's almost like a state park type thing now. Any other comments on that one?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, because mankind created slag heaps in order for progress. In other words, he was mining with his coal or gold or platinum or anything else, these big slag heaps, or copper. If you go to that big copper mine in Arizona, I think it is, we've been someplace down there. Or the thing that I'm the closest to be having participated in farming. When we started, we learned how to use fertilizers. And when we first started farming when I was a little boy, fertilizer, of course, came from the feed yard, the manure from the horses and the cattle and the pigs and the stuff. And that was natural fertilizers. Then we made the chemicals, we learned how to take nitrogen out of the air and dig phosphorus out of the ground and calcium and potassium. And when I first started farming, when I was a little boy, I remember we had fertilizer called like 12-12-12, which was potassium, phosphate, and nitrogen. And we just put on a few pounds per acre because if you did too much, you're going to burn the crop and blah, blah, blah. And well, eventually we would put on hundreds of pounds, particularly of nitrogen. And now the runoff from the fertilized soils has contaminated the rivers and the lakes and the stuff with high nitrogen. And of course, some of the wildlife suffered from it. Another wildlife, of course, evolved into be able to handle it. It mentioned certain fish and stuff in some highly polluted waters. And some of the other books that we've read, the deep ocean, where high temperatures, bacteria and certain organisms learn to grow in it. But mankind is so good at producing something for his own benefit, whether it's a big corn crop from 40 bushel to 400 bushel per acre, or 50 pounds of potatoes to 100,000 pounds per acre, because we learn technology. And it's kind of interesting how mankind's science and progress, whether it's in agriculture, and of course, you think about space technology and what is going to evolve. And of course, man's life, my life is so far been pretty good in 90 years of it. And who knows, a lot of people, most of my friends, many of them aren't around anymore, schoolmates. But so, we have such a short time as an individual, but as society and a few generations, we can destroy, whether it's a slag heap or a lake, because we contaminate it and we build dams, and the dams, water silts up the lake because of the farming. We don't practice good farming, and the soil just fills up the lake. Clinton Lake out here, they say in another 50 to 60 years will probably be useless as a reservoir because there won't be enough water really to do anything. And it was built as a flood control. Clinton Lake and Taneycomo and a lot of these lakes are built as flood control, not recreational, but of course we use them for recreation. And the farm runoff contaminates them. So it's interesting how mankind in our effort to better our own life, we end up destroying not just the earth, but maybe generations in the future. So my great grandkids, I wonder what's going to be like for little Annalise or Aaliyah when he's 90 years old. And science is going to make help people live longer if we don't destroy them with drones and war. And that's another thing we can do. If you read the book about World War I, the killing or the poppy fields in Austria or Belgium, wherever it is, France, I guess they were in France, where they bombed it so bad, there's so much chemicals and salts in there that nothing grows. So far, there's been no recovery in that particular section. It's still off limits to people visiting it. You remember the person couldn't even, it's dangerous to even go in and visit it because of the contamination. And we're doing that, of course, with our atomic bombs. We can contaminate whole cities or whole areas, thousands of square miles with one big bomb. Nagasaki, Hiroshima, there's still heavy concentration of radiation in those places, which creates a lot of issues with mankind. And perhaps mankind will learn to, as Marcia was alluding to, outgrow it somehow. The bodies and generations learn how to live with this contaminated water. When we were in India or some places in the islands, Indonesia, and the mothers were washing clothes and stuff, and little boys defecating and everything in the little stream running by their house. And down the stream later, a guy was taking his bucket and getting a bucket of water to take home to cook with. Well, it just boggles my mind that how we can destroy ourselves in our zeal to better ourselves. Destroy where we're living, I guess, is a better way to say it.
And ruin things for others, like you said, for future generations, or as you just pointed out, the person down the stream.
That's right. Well, our water plant here in Lawrence, we would not have fresh water without the science and be able to purify the water that comes out of the Cal River. Because remember, the people in Manhattan are dumping all their sewage in the Cal River. Oh, they're treating it now before they dump it in there, which is, of course, does help. But still, I had a friend that when we had our office downtown, he was a dairyman and he had a big dairy plant. And they closed some of the dairy plants. They converted them to making water, bottled water. And he would bring us these bottles of water, and he furnished a lot of water. And he said, we take the water out of the plant there out of this mains in Kansas City, and we purified double osmosis or something. He said, if you see what we dump back in, he said, you would never drink from the tap. He said, if you see what we take out of that tap water before, as we were making these bottles, he said, you would never drink tap water again, knowing that that's what's in it. Because when we take out all of it, and then they would have to put a few salts and stuff back in to make it have some taste, they put some potassium or certain chemicals in it because we don't like water that's tasteless. That's funny, you don't like water that's tasteless, but that's true. Pure distilled water is tasteless, and we don't like it.
Yeah, well, and so we can skip, I guess, since we're talking about that, there were a couple that had to do with that type of pollution. I think it's Paterson, New Jersey. That was one where it was built, and during the Industrial Revolution, a lot of textile mills were built along the river. And
Yes.
the rivers were dyed blues and greens, and you could tell that they said you can tell what season it is by the color of the river based on what the colors being dyed. And I can't remember, that one was one where like they couldn't, you know, like the water wasn't usable, but I think they could still kind of fish work. But the next one was Arthur Kill, and that one was I can't remember what it was. It was similar Industrial Revolution, but the remnants or refuse off of that was cancerous, and you couldn't eat, like there was all these signs that says don't eat the crabs because they're cancerous. They could actually, you know, cause cancer and kill you. But people, they talked about people did anyway, because it's a poor area, I think it was Staten Island. And, you know, she talked about seeing people who were, you know, taking them and it's either selling the meat to make money, that's all they had, or, you know, to eat, because like, yeah, it's gonna kill me, but not eating is also gonna kill
Die
me.
earlier if I
Yeah.
didn't eat, yeah.
So those were the couple to kind of relate to Chuck's comments about runoff. Other ones, I'm trying to kind of relate these to, you know, how much involvement or known involvement, right, that humans had, right? And some of these are like, obviously it's horrible to dump stuff into the river. One other one was listed was well, so yeah, so we mentioned Verdun. That was the France one where they just bombed. It was I think one of the longest battles in World War I. I think they said, if not the history. But it kind of culminated in the Germans just unleashing everything onto France, and it said it, you know, it just not only physically but just chemically and just ruined the landscape. It said it eroded 1,000 years worth of time in this. I mean, it just completely changed the landscape. So that was one of them. And it talked about her finding this. It's a weird. I have to read it again, but there's kind of this weird parallel structure she uses between a movie she watched that has this, like, there's like a little cottage cabin, like the woodcutter's lodge, right? This very old-timey, very, very European thing. There's a movie about it, so she went and found it. In order to do it, you had to she crawled under the fence, which means she dug into the arsenic ground. And I'm like, she did a lot of stuff. Like, she got into all this stuff that's toxic and poisonous. And, you know, how long did she?
And she hasn't had any health repercussions from
not
that?
that I heard of, but each chapter kind of ends on these cliffhanger, because it ends with her finding it and stepping inside this cottage, but it doesn't say what she found. It doesn't. It's a very, and I'm wondering if it almost makes me want to watch the movie to know if that kind of answers, or not what's in it, but answers why she just decided to leave it. Because maybe by explaining what's in the thing, it also ruins the movie. I don't know. But it's an old movie. It's a movie from the 70s anyways. That,
do you know did it say what the movie
yeah, it
is?
did. Let me find it.
Well, when she was crawling around under that fence and so forth with that, I wondered, how long will she live? Will we be reading about her death before long? Will she get cancer from crawling around there? Or get poisoned just from arsenic?
Oh, here it is. Andrei Tarkovsky's great masterpiece, Stalker, made in 1979, a film set in a dystopian near future in which a Soviet man known as the Stalker guides two strangers to a mysterious, tightly guarded exclusion zone. Yeah, and so so she kind of relives this movie, and she kind of follows it around and that sort of thing. Other ones, and then of course it mentions Chernobyl, which is one that's kind of, you know, they did as much precautions as they could. I mean, granted, depending on your view of how that worked, right? How much, like, some of it, they were kind of skirting some laws, you know, whatever, they caused it, they kind of played it low of what is actually happening, but this was one that, like, they didn't necessarily mean to do it. I mean, yes, we're still
Right.
culpable, but we didn't, like, intend for this. But it talked about, you know, animals coming back and people coming back, and it was, in opposition to the other one with the fish being and the crabs unsafe, it appeared that, like, animals were fine, and, you know, it was okay. People came back and hunted and fished, and and I think it had to do with the half-life of whatever the radiation was. Like, yeah, there's some areas that are bad, and I'm not a scientist, but it seemed like the animals at least weren't affected as much. And I think there were still, like, obviously the first generation type things, you know, there was a lot of, you know, miscarriages with animals or barrenness, but it seemed to, at the writing.
Yeah. It's resolved.
Yeah, and there was, again, it goes back to this idea that we've talked about, is like the poor get hurt the most, because, like, there's some people who that was their livelihood, like they had to go back. They didn't really have a choice about it. Another one was the blight in Detroit, which was one that's like, so it's, you know, in the boom of the 50s and 60s in the auto industry, and then the 70s, we started sending manufacturing overseas. Also overseas manufacturing became bigger with, you know, with Japanese and Korean cars coming bigger. So a lot of plants closed. And one of them, I believe it was Packard, I think, that was the plant that she visited, right? It's a auto manufacturer that no longer makes vehicles, which in the 40s and 50s was one of the largest. And that was an interesting one, that, like, it's become kind of like the squatter's land. I mean, again, there's these thousands of square feet, miles of buildings, and people just kind of take over it. I mean, we've kind of become the animal in that one. It's taken it over. But again, like, several houses, I mean, houses just get, right, it's the blight, right? People leave and it just becomes a vacant house. And it talks about where, if people find out that there's a vacant house, it immediately turns into a crack den, right? Oh, it's vacant. So there's people who, like, go around and upkeep houses that are empty just to make it look like someone lives there, because if it looks like someone lives there, it won't be, you know, turned into overtaken. It's just this, it's like this weird cancerous thing, this blight. But again, I mean, that's an interesting one about, it's one, like, it's not a bad, I mean, it's like, we didn't damage Earth, it's just that people left because they didn't have jobs. And this is what happens when, you know, it's just, it's entropy, right? Things just kind of go back to what nature does.
Well,
Well, we were in Cambodia. It was Cambodia at Angkor Wat.
yes,
That's where it is, Marcia. I can't remember which city, which country. Angkor Wat was in Cambodia, not Vietnam. Anyway, some of the places were abandoned, you know, several hundred years ago, I guess. But the buildings were fantastically stone buildings, and the trees have just grown up through them and in them. And well, there's a big movie made of the famous guy that makes these crazy movies. What's his name, Marcia? Anyway, the trees and stuff, and it's really a tourist place now. So it's become a moneymaker for Cambodia in that area. But how the forest has just taken over what used to be cities and temples, and just the trees grow up through them and in them and around them. And the main temple is still there, and it's something fantastic. You wonder how they built it. I forget how many 100 years ago, but and as far as mankind's lifetime on this planet is not that long. And when you think about it, mankind has been around for several 100,000 years as an upright Homo sapiens, inventing things and developing things and farming and creating and destroying. And I guess that'll happen over the next million years. Who knows what's going to happen? But we think of 80, 90, 100 years or a generation or 2 or 3 generations as being something useful. But that's a very short time in the time space of creation. 1,000 years is not even a minuscule second.
Well, in Detroit, I was curious about that. And of course, this book was written in 2020, 2021. Anyway, I thought that downtown Detroit, and I don't know whether she was really talking about downtown Detroit or not, but my understanding that downtown Detroit is being rebuilt as the Muslims are moving in. But I don't, but it didn't seem to jive with this, but it might be the location.
Yeah. Yeah, I think she picked like just a very specific, she picked the audio industry. So she just talked about, you know, the effects of people leaving from the audio industry. But yeah, there are, I think you're right, Marcia. I think there are certain areas that are kind of being repurposed and rehabitated by humans, but that doesn't really go with kind of her thesis of, or just her area of like, here are these lands that people have deserted, and here's how kind of nature is coming back. This one, I wonder, it's like some of this, it's like it proves that like this quote, we've neglected it, is a bad thing. And I think the book says, and the book argues, and she argues, like our neglect is okay. Like it's not a bad thing that we have neglected this. Like, and like maybe that's what we should have done.
Yeah, sometimes the
Right.
neglect
It's like
helps.
we look at it and we
more than-
feel like, oh, poor thing. We feel sympathy that, oh, look at what it used to be and now it's in ruin. It's like, well, but no, it's just being repurposed for something else, and that's a good thing. That's how it should be, right? It's similar to like, you know, people now or some people are concerned that, oh, the population is going down, people aren't having as many kids and they're having them later, and it's like, yeah, like I'm all for it.
Right.
Because like
Yeah.
people before were having too many and we're having an issue with overpopulation. Now it's like, no, it's just leveling off. Like, it's okay that we're not having anything, but right, people look at it and be like, oh, well, that, I mean, right, in a capitalist economy where
Right.
people need money,
Mhm.
then yeah, they're concerned because their profits aren't gonna be as great, but like, that's not the goal of life, isn't capitalism, it's, you know, a good quality life, and if there's,
Yeah.
you know,
Mhm.
maybe less people on the planet is a good thing. And in a natural, non-killing way, right? Like, oh yeah, we just don't have as many kids instead of, you know.
Right, it's like by attrition, or, you know,
It's just,
instead of by killing them off,
Yeah.
or having a giant war that
Yeah.
kills off millions of people.
right.
Well, and especially when population is exploding exponentially. I mean, we're at what, 8 billion now?
Yeah,
And I
I think we
remember
just,
when it was 6 billion
Yeah.
in my lifetime.
yeah,
And, you know, so that's a train that's rolling down the tracks pretty fast.
right,
Well, I don't think she got into this at all, but since I know so many old people who are just waiting to die, yet we do everything to keep them alive. And that I just do not understand.
Yeah, I mean, euthanasia is one thing, which we can discuss or
Ethics
just
and
like
the-
physician assisted
right.
suicide, right? I mean, we don't have to
But
go, but like,
Right.
but like, or just let it happen. Instead, we have, we feel like,
Natural.
taking as many medications and drugs and surgeries as possible.
Right, to keep them alive, to keep them.
But it's an
what
interesting
is
thing
the
of like,
quality of life.
your body's alive, but like, are you like that person that you remembered from, growing up
Right.
isn't really alive, right? Like,
Mhm.
the only thing you have are the memories.
Right. And you're not able
It's
to function
interesting.
or.
Sorry, I interrupted you, Marcia.
no, that's what I was that's what I meant. And but I see people, well, I love it when people say, well, it just wasn't my time. God wasn't ready to take me, but they take meds, they do everything to stay alive. And if they didn't, they would die. And I have a friend who keeps telling me, oh, I would like to die. I says, well, stop taking your inhalers. That'll quicken it real quick.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Continues to take your inhalers.
But I think, I don't know. Life is precious, I guess,
Yeah.
and.
Well, and that's, Marcia, you say she doesn't talk about it, but I think she mentioned it, mentions it, excuse me, a little bit in, I believe it's about Rose Cottage, which is it's a cottage on a like small island off the northern coast of Scotland. There's just a single cottage on it. And this family lived on it for generations, and like, the kids lived on it, and actually one of the kids had like never seen anyone else but her family for like the first 20 years of her life. And anyway, they grow up and they get old, and like one of them starts to have health issues, so they go back to the mainland. And right before that, they open the cattle pen, and just let the cattle just take over. So it goes on about this, which we can talk in a little bit about, the idea of, are these animals still domesticated? Are they wild? Like, it goes into like the semantics of like what domesticated versus wild versus tame mean. But she goes and she finds a dead and decomposing bull, calf, or not a bull, calf. It's kind of an oxymoron. A bull. And it talks about how when it first died, it was kicked off out of the herd because it was the alpha, and like, right, and how it is like there's an alpha bull, and then eventually one smaller bull, as this bull gets older, becomes weaker, and all of a sudden it gets overpowered by the next bull, and they basically just shun it. But the bull dies, and then but the other cows find it and like check on it, and almost like it's like they didn't really like forget about it or not care, but they still cared about it, and they came back, every day or every week to like pay respects to this decomposing, and then it goes into this like, I mean, she finds it after several months of just decay, and she goes into very not extreme detail, but very vivid language of the senses she's having of experiencing this dead cow. But I think she kind of does touch on the idea of like just the circle of life and the kind of the natural order of things, and
Right.
Cows and animals seem to have a better understanding of, you grow old, and die, and that's okay, and that's what happens, and somehow we, I think, kind of lost touch with that. And I say we as in like Western society,
culture.
yeah.
Well, that kind of reminds me of our discussion last month about the octopus.
Yes.
My octopus teacher.
Yes.
At the end where the octopus, is gestating her eggs, and she kind of sequesters herself, you know, in this one place for months of her year-long life, and then she has them, and then she dies, and or even while she's dying, the fish come and start nibbling at her.
Yeah,
And then the shark that she's been fending off, you know, throughout the rest of the movie, finally gets her and carries her off. And
yeah. It's this interesting thing of like, you know, I feel like, you know, we talk about, using our resources, and it's like, this may sound anti-life, but it's like, maybe living too long is using more resources than what God gave you. I feel like these animals, right, the octopus is like, nope, I mean, like, why does it have to not eat, and why does it have to like die? Like, it doesn't have
Right.
to. It just,
Right.
but it somehow has this innate idea of, this is God's purpose for me, and my purpose is to eat, you know, reproduce, have more kids, and give them, you know, live long enough to at least have them hatch, and then I can't, and then,
Continue,
and then
yeah.
I'm done.
Mhm.
But I'm gonna, but it fights to the teeth until that happens, and it's like, okay, this
Right.
was my job on earth is done, and I feel like maybe we fight too much to have too long a life.
Right, to extend our life, which kind of goes back to what Chuck was talking about earlier of, you know, what we do affects, we don't think about what we do affecting others, like maybe in this situation, working to live a longer and longer lifespan is kind of like pooping in the stream, I mean,
Right,
not really, but you know, you're taking up those extra resources. I can't
And this-
remember what the
and
other
this isn't-
example was.
this is definitely not a like anti-vax, like, oh, if I'm gonna get
Oh,
sick,
heck
I'm gonna
no.
die, like, but it's like, no, like,
Right.
you live a full life, and, but if you're getting to an age, you know, that you don't feel like it's sustaining anymore,
Right, yeah, do not resuscitate, you know, you have a DNR on
Yeah.
your
yeah.
living will or whatever, and yeah.
I
Not
mean,
want to
that,
be kept
and I
alive
think,
by machinery.
and again, that's. like,
I
can't-
don't
that's another thing.
realize with the DNR, if you dial 911, they have to resuscitate you, even if you have a DNR. And I think part of the issue is, at least with couples I know, they don't know they don't know if help will save the person or whether they should let them die. And they don't want to be the person who makes that decision. And because I know some women whose husband has had an issue and they call 911. Well, they live for about a week and they die, but they're not going to stand there and do nothing. I mean, but they don't know how serious it is.
Right, yeah, it's a,
Yeah, letting, the whole concept of letting nature take its course, though, is,
yeah, it definitely changes when you think about, you know, micro scenarios or specific day-to-day things that, and again, I, you know, speaking as someone who's in their thirties, like, I can only talk on like macro level things, because I haven't
Mhm.
experienced that, but I feel like more on a like, as a generational, or as like, and you know, not on a personal level, but just on a societal, cultural level, you know, we spend too much on that kind of thing.
Mhm. Too much time meddling, maybe.
Yeah. I think, what other little towns there were, so the last one it talked about, and I'll go to the one more after that, but, was the Salton Sea, and this one, I think we talked a little bit about this when we read about, the Colorado River, when it gets to California. This is where, it overflows I think the river is in like its own man-made concrete, channels or canals. It overflows and then it like, becomes it becomes this ocean or this lake, but then it dries up, but it's never like water enough to like inhabit anything. And like sometimes there's fish, but most of the time, like around the edges, it's just stagnant water and gross, and there's rotting stuff.
Homeless people living there. Or homeless, we call them homeless, but they're there because they have no place else or they want to be.
Yeah, it's.
But mankind, as I think you were alluding to the fact that we got about 8 billion people on the planet. And that's, how many billions can the planet can hold? And every one of those newborns, if we are producing more than are dying, we got to have more food, resources. So we dig up more stuff, grow more stuff, make more stuff, destroy more stuff, make more plastic bags to clutter up the water, pollute the water because we make more sewage, and we make more medicine to give to people, whether they're babies or old people, so they don't die. And it's a mankind created problem. Mankind creates his own problems. Religions say God does it. Well, I'm kind of religious in some ways, but I'm anti-religious probably in most ways, that mankind is creating his own destiny. God created the earth of man, and it's fantastic. The creation to me is fantastic. The invisible spirits that live within us and around us, and I said spirits, plural. You got to realize, at least I do, that Holy Spirit is one. Christ is only one spirit. There are hundreds of spirits. And you remember the story Bible of the Legion, the guy that had all those spirits that Christ run them out of them. They went to the pigs. It doesn't say how many pigs there were, but there was a lot of them. And they all run off into the ocean. That's a metaphor. But to me, that illustrates that all the spirits of anger, hate, greed, things that we don't like each other, those spirits inhabit each one of us daily. You and me have to fight them. And fortunately, if I don't know, the 8 billion people, I don't know that there's enough things right now that if everything was distributed equally, whether that would be enough to do it or not. But tonight when we went to see the Christmas lights over at Fish Creek, and most of those houses under the current economic situation, some of them were cost a few $100,000 to build, and now they sell them for millions. And the little house that we live in, we bid 90,000 and it lists at 250,000. It's the same thing. It doesn't hold any more people, but it costs a lot more to keep it than it did when we bought it. And yet I'm wondering, we live very well in this little place of 1,600 square feet. And some people got to have 6,000 square feet for same 2 people. That's a sort of waste. Yeah. And there are millions of people with nothing. I mean, thousands of them coming across the border, which some people hate. They don't want them coming across the border. And some people, we know that they need to be helped. And we feel sorry for those little kids that are dying and starving. And we were in Uganda, and 3 or 4 people living in a place that's not as big as our walk-in closet. And, you know, with rats and snakes and stuff, they have to make sure the snake is not in the bed when they go to bed at night in their cot. They're rags, really, this, what we would call rags, you wouldn't sleep in them. So, you know, mankind is, whether God created mankind the way the scripture says or not is far cry from me to try to interpret. So all I know is that God turned us loose. And we use our spirit for good or for bad. Mostly we use our spirit for me. My spirit is for me first, just like Trump. And you can expand that to me first, my family first, instead of God first, you second, and me third. It isn't that way at all. When you get right down to my ego, I have to be as bad as the rest of them. Me first, God somewhere there. And as I got older, I think that the God of the Holy Spirit, or a spirit, is available, and I choose which spirit to let to be in control at this moment. And hopefully I'm choosing the good spirit more than the bad spirits, because I think there's a lot of bad spirit around. Most people don't believe in it. I once talked to a Muslim guy and I said, well, do you believe in spirit? He said, I don't believe in spirit. I believe in thought. I said, show me a thought. You can't show me a spirit. Maybe you can show me a thought. Is spirit a thought? It's fascinating to contemplate. Sometimes I sit outside when the weather's warmer, just looking up into the sky and imagining that all that empty space is not empty. It's full of all that spirit, the good, the bad, the indifferent. And I have a choice to choose to control me at the moment. It's hard. It's not hard, but it's a challenge. To me anyway.
Voice is a powerful force.
And this book, it just pointed out to me of how mankind, in our zeal to take care of myself first, by producing more goods. When I was a farmer, I wanted to produce more corn and pigs and soybeans per acre than the neighbor, because I could make more money if I did that.
Well, so this is kind of a tangent, but locally, there's a winery out east of town that was affected by their neighbors spraying for weeds on the other side of the road. And it wiped out, I don't know how much of their grapevines. But you know, that's a local example of somebody intervening, meddling with, you know, trying to produce more of whatever they were growing.
Yeah.
But in the process, destroying what their neighbors were trying to grow.
We're spraying their wheat or corn or beans for weeds or bugs or something, and the wind was in the wrong direction. And I've seen it happen. And sometimes it produces different. We first moved here 50, 60 years ago, whatever it was. We had a place out in a farm out there by the lake, and we had a big garden. And I planted like 20 tomato plants, you know, or 20, 25 tomato plants, about in 2 rows. And we had a big acreage, 700-800 acres, and we sprayed the corn one time and with airplane, and the drift of the spray for weeds blew over there. And I come home from work one night and my tomato plants were just dying. They were all just a wilted, like they would just did. Well, having been an agriculturalist that studied that, I knew something about plants, taking etymology and all that. So I trimmed them all back. I just butchered them, so to speak. I pruned them. And they just kept growing. And that summer, those 20 plants spread out probably 15 to 20 feet wide. We had more tomatoes than we could ever use. And those plants just grew quiet, just went wild and produced and produced and produced. And so, you know, if I'd have been in scientist at that time and back in college or something, I'd said, well, to produce more, sometimes we need to prune it back.
Yeah.
Go ahead and spray it and then prune it back. And then whatever it did, it created those plants, made them grow crazy. And they just produced. It was fascinating. It would grow over to the cornfield, the corn, sweet corn that I had grown at the same plot. Had a big garden plot. I thought the tomatoes were going to die, and that was the end of that plant. But then I just trimmed them all off, knowing that, well, I got to get rid of the poison parts of the plant so it doesn't go down into the root. And I trimmed them all off that night, just butchered them, so to speak. And man, in a week, they were growing like crazy. And before the summer was over, frost came and they were producing tomatoes right up till freezing time. So, you know, mankind does funny things and unintended consequences that Marcia talked about. We don't know what they're going to be. And sometimes they're good and sometimes they're not so good. Remember the thalidomide babies, thalidomide, that created babies with no arms and stuff like that. They found out that it was a medication that they were giving pregnant mothers. Fantastic idea. It was going to be a great thing. And boy, it sure didn't end up great for a lot of children. Many that are in their 50s and 60s now, or 70s probably, still, if they're still alive, with no arms, no limbs, are funny. Just, you know, really dismembered.
Yeah, to close up on.
Humans got a great potential for good, but
Yeah.
we mostly don't do as good as we should.
Yeah, I think the book, to me, kind of hits the climax, on page, 324. It says, time is, after all, the great healer. The question is, how long does it need? Then how long have we got? It may not be long. This is the time of the confessional, of the admission of sins. This is a time to pray, if you know how, to God or Gaia, or simply by throwing one's entreaties to the other in a gesture of helplessness and hope. A time for faith, in other words. Julian of Norwich, in the account of her 13th revelation, said that God came to her in a corporeal form, and to her that there must be sin in the world. It behooved that there should be sin, and yet, despite it all, everything was going to be all right. That all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. I am no mystic. I have received no visitation, no annunciation. There may be no absolution, but I do know this: all is not lost.
I believe that. Man can be creative, more creative than we are destructive.
Well, I think it's a good end to this year's book study because I think all the things we've been talking about, then she kind of summarized it all and leaves us with hope.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, as the Christians or something, I think that the answer is love. But getting 8 billion people to love each other the way Christ loved us, loves them, is a challenge. And I don't think our religion is doing a very good job of answering that challenge. Whether it's a Christian or a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Muslim or a Shinto or a non-religious person, we have to love each other as better than we love ourselves. And that is a challenge for everybody. I think maybe Mother Teresa was a good example. Christ, of course, the leading example. At least in our scriptures, that's what. Okay, good, good, Joe. Good job,
So.
Matthew.
Yes, so next month, we're going to just keep reading books. I have planned, and this may change, but currently, we'll be reading On Time and Water by Andre Magnuson. Let me read just a quick, paragraph of a review. On Time and Water is a very personal environmental book, which makes it different than the rest. Andre Magnuson of Iceland is a documenter. He is all about tracing his relatives as far back as he can, preserving their stories and their photos in print. And this being Iceland, everyone seemed to have a really intimate connection to glaciers. As most readers will not have such a personal history on glaciers, the book can be captivating. It will not even occur to most people that can have it will not even occur to most that people can have personal relationships with glaciers, and soon no one will have that opportunity at all.
Can you send the title in an email, Matthew?
Yes, I will definitely do that. All right.
Okay, we'll see you later.
Sounds great.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye, Marcia.
Bye-bye.